Okay, welcome. In today's session, I am going to be talking about two definitions and two um, topics that I regularly find to be both fascinating, but sometimes also misunderstood. Now, without any further delay, let's get started. And the first word is investing, and the second word is speculation. And in today's session, I'm going to try and bring together the two words in relation to properties, and how to think how to think of both concepts in your investment journey and in your day-to-day uh, decision making process, just to ensure that you are making the right decision um, for yourself. In the prior session, we started the idea of valuing unequal spaces. And in that session, I briefly introduced something called the replacement cost approach for valuations. For valuations. And in today's session, or rather, today's session would be the beginning of the process of understanding the concept of investing, the concept of speculation, and the process of valuing properties. I'll go into a lot more detail in the subsequent sessions uh, on the topic of valuations, but for the purpose of today's session, let me begin by describing a few concepts, and I think this will be very, very useful as we move forward. I'd like to define a few concepts. I often like to start with definitions because once you understand the definition of a concept, it becomes easy to build on that foundation, or to build a philosophy, to build a set of principles, a set of ideals, to serve as a guidance system along your investment journey. Now, the word investing or the word investor, you probably have heard people use the word "I'm an investor," or he's a good investor, she's a good investor, or investing. We invested in a property, we invested in this, we invested in this. The word investor is something that is broadly used to categorize anyone, and in this particular context, I'm going to focus on properties. It's used to generally used to broadly categorize people or anyone who has bought a property, whether the person has bought the property intelligently, or whether they haven't. Now, in today's session, I'm going to try and expand your knowledge base so that you can become a little bit more discriminating when using the word investing or investor. The word is also used particularly in relation to what I call the end of a capital allocation process. And this simply means, just think about this. You have two people, AB and Sarah. And AB goes into a transaction with Sarah, and he exchanges £10 in exchange for some product that Sarah owns. At the point where the money is exchanged, people tend to call that investing, because that signifies the end of the capital transfer or capital allocation process. So generally, people tend to assign the word investing to what happens once you've actually expended cash, rather than the means deployed to achieve that end. Now, you've probably heard the statement, the end justifies the means. And what I'm saying here is that most people focus on the end of the process and justify the end and the outcome as investing. I'd like you to be a little bit more discriminating and try to realize that the means and the process through which you arrive at the end is technically what distinguishes you as an investor from everyone else. We tend to use this word investor indiscriminately, partly because some people believe that it's very difficult to distinguish between the two words. People believe it's difficult to distinguish what is investing and what is speculation. I have a different position on that perspective. And my position that is you should always try to separate both concepts. Everybody you find or you meet in the market, in the property market, is not the same. Some have more experience, some apply a different methodology to their process, and some have a different philosophy. So it's not usually correct to group every single person who buys a property under the same umbrella. I think it's flawed, and this is a personal view. I think it's a flawed strategy to assume that anyone who buys or anyone who sells a property or an asset is an investor. It's flawed if you do not take into account a few things. One is, this is my perspective, I should say that. One is what is bought. That's the first thing. You have to consider, okay, what was bought? The second is the price that was paid. The third is the terms of the deal. The fourth is how was it funded. Was it funded with debt? Was it funded with equity? Was it funded with a combination of debt and equity? Was it funded with just completely debt? No equity. All of these 4 questions is what enables you to separate investing from the concept of speculation. Now, let me start by perhaps bringing some focus to the concept by beginning with the definition. But to make sure that the definition is more applicable to every single person and to all asset classes, although I am specifically focusing on properties, let me give you what I consider to be the best definition of the term that I have come across. And this definition comes from someone called Benjamin Graham. Now, Benjamin Graham was the person who taught Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Both of these people are considered to be one of the greatest investors of the 21st century. Benjamin Graham was an investor himself, but he was also a teacher, a lecturer, and he came up with a definition that I like. And he said that investing, an investment operation, which is how he defined it. He didn't define investing, and this is important. What he tried to do was try to combine the means and the end. So rather than look at the outcome, he looked at the process, and he combined the process with the outcome. So the means, the end. And he came up with a definition that I thought was quite interesting. He said, rather than define investing, I'm going to define the operational part of what we call the investment process. So an investment operation is one which, upon thorough analysis, promises safety of principal and a satisfactory return. Operations not meeting these requirements are speculative. Now let me say that again, and I'll draw your attention to 3 or 4 perhaps key words in that definition. Benjamin Graham's definition of an investment operation is one which, upon thorough analysis, promises safety of your principal and a satisfactory return. And operations that do not meet these requirements are speculative. Now, there are a few things to keep in mind. He defined an operation which covers the process and the outcome. But the focus more was on the process, because the outcome, you cannot tell from an outcome whether the decision that was made was the right decision or the wrong decision. In the same way that you cannot tell from a decision whether the outcome will be consistent or correct. Investing is not a science. A science simply means that the laws of science apply and they are predictable. Investing is a combination of a scientific process applied in a world of randomness, and in a world where other people can influence the outcome. And therefore, there is an art to investing, because it requires the individual to apply their temperament, their skill sets, their wisdom, apply it into a process, the outcome for which they cannot guarantee in advance, although they might have a certain level of expectation. So investing combines an art and a science, and it's what I like to call a craft. You get better with investing, but the outcome is still never guaranteed, because there is happenstance, there is chance, there is luck, there is skill, there is timing. And for that reason, the process is the main focus on this definition. Other than operation, the other words that I would like to draw your attention to are as follows. Thorough analysis. So in order for you to be investing, whatever you do, you must go through a process of doing a thorough analysis, a detailed analysis. And that's what distinguishes speculation from investing, primarily. Those who speculate usually do not go through the process of doing a thorough analysis. The second is that there's a promise of safety that is associated with that process. The third is actually that if you do a thorough analysis, it should promise you some safety, but also it should give you some satisfactory return for your invested capital. These 3 things primarily define what I consider to be the process of investing. Now let me bring that together in my own terms. I've taken Benjamin Graham's definition and I refined that definition to make it more specific to properties. But let me expand. Based on the definition I've given from Benjamin above, your purchase of a property will be considered an investment if you carry out the following three prerequisite actions. Number one is that you should thoroughly analyze the property, both quantitatively, and by quantitatively I'm referring to estimating its value, and qualitatively, and by qualitatively I'm referring to doing your detailed site inspection, doing your detailed property viewing, and doing a detailed research based on everything that I've shared so far in the prior sessions. So a good way of stating this would be, in the sessions that follow, I'm going to be showing you how to do quantitative analysis and how to analyze a property quantitatively to estimate its value. But in the prior sessions that I've done, I have focused on giving you all of the qualitative factors, all of the qualitative steps. The second thing is that you should protect your capital or your principal against permanent loss of capital. So you should protect your principal against permanent loss. And one of the ways to do this is to ensure that you apply what we call a margin of safety. You pay less for the property in price or in cash than it's worth in value. That way, what that means is that, for example, if you found a property that is worth £100, and you paid a price of 70, the value is there, the price is here, the total purchase price, in this case, purchase cost. You have a 30% margin of safety. So, for example, if something were to happen, if you paid 70 and this is the value, technically the earning potential of the property would have to deteriorate by 30% for the property's value to fall down to what you paid, and it would have to fall by more than 30% in order for you to actually start to recognize a paper loss, which could turn into a real loss. So the margin of safety that you have in your purchase process serves as a protection against errors that you may have made in your estimation, or a protection against all the macro factors that could affect or change the value of the property or the earning potential of the property. The third is that you should earn a satisfactory return. But satisfactory is a word that is subjective, and therefore I qualify this to say, in addition to achieving a satisfactory return on your invested capital, that return must be one that is greater than what I call your hurdle rate. And your hurdle rate is simply, if you were to think about the concept of opportunity cost, what would be the opportunity cost? What could you earn on an asset or on an investment of equivalent risk? So for example, if you found 6 properties, the first you could earn 6%, the second 7, the third 8, the fourth 8.5, the fifth 9, the sixth 10. If you decided that all you needed was 6% to break even, and let's say your cost of funding, the cost of capital was 6%, you could make a decision that 6% is sufficient to meet your cost of funding. But on an opportunity cost basis, the fact that you have other assets, maybe on the same street, capable of producing 10% with equivalent risk, with similar characteristics, that would mean that your hurdle rate should be increased to 10%. So providing you're earning 10%, then that investment, if it were to meet the first two conditions, it would be considered to be an investment operation. If, for whatever reason, your purchase does not meet any of the three prerequisite steps that I have provided, then that means that you are speculating. You are not investing. Let me put it in a more concrete way. You find a property. You do not visit the property. You do not carry out a detailed analysis of the property. You simply fall in love with the property and emotionally attached. You are attached to the property. That would mean that if you were to proceed and purchase the property without doing a thorough analysis, both quantitatively or qualitatively, in this case, you didn't value the property. You just simply said, the property is priced at £2 million. I think that's about right because properties in an area have sold previously at 2.1 million. And you proceed to buy. The fact that you haven't gone through the first step, the fact that perhaps you haven't included the margin of safety, because one of the ways to actually ensure that you protect your capital against permanent loss is to ensure that you have a good understanding of the relationship between the price of the property and the value, so that you know whether you're buying the property below its intrinsic value or whether you're buying the property at a premium above its intrinsic value. And number three, if you never considered what the hurdle rate would be, and in this case, let's say the property you purchased for 2.2 million is giving you a 3% return, when your actual cost of funding, maybe you funded with some debts and some equity, maybe your cost of funding is say 4.2%. It means you're earning a return that is less than your cost of funding. And if the opportunity cost hurdle rate is 10%, it means you're earning 3%, whereas other properties, had you done a proper due diligence, you could have found another property giving you 10%. If you were to go through the purchase, then I would say that you were speculating. I should say this, speculation is not immoral, it's not illegal, but it is different from investing. We know, for example, if you think about Airbnb, if you think about Uber, if you think about Tesla, these were at some point in time, these were early startup companies. And usually when you have startups, because those companies are in the early stages of business formation, it's not unusual for you to speculate, for you to look to the future of the businesses and put more weight on the future of the businesses than you do on its present intrinsic value, because at that point in time, they really have, they do not have a lot of assets or investments in traditional form, either as hard assets or soft assets. Most of their investments and their wealth will come from the future and what they create. So some speculation is necessary for business formation. Sometimes, even if in property investing, if you found the property and the value of the property, the estimated intrinsic value was say 300,000, and you decided, having negotiated with the seller, a price of 230,000, because it was a good property, and you established that it was better for you to buy a great property at a fair price rather than an average property at a cheap price. In this case, you could make a plausible case. If you've done your estimation, you can make a plausible case that £30,000 off the 330 is speculative, and the remaining is investing. That'll be perfectly fine, because now what you're looking at is you're saying, of the £330,000, I'm actually using £30,000 to speculate, which is roughly let's call it 9.8% of the purchase value is speculative, and the remaining 91.2% or thereabouts. Again, forgive me, I'm doing this in my head. I know this is 11, 1 over 11, so you're looking at roughly 9%. You can make a claim that I'm aware of how much I'm speculating. Now, the reason I've used this example is to make a statement, which is, it's important to identify when and why you were speculating. And it's equally important to determine, like I have, the portion of your capital that is exposed to the risk of speculation. The reason for that is because there is something that I call intelligent speculation, such as what I have done here. A reason for this paying an extra £30,000 could be that you have established that perhaps the growth rate in cash flow currently is 5%, and you have estimated that this could grow to 7%. Maybe with some improvement of the property, or maybe because you've done some research of the local area and you could see why there will be a lot of demand for properties. In the present, you have no evidence for that, because the future is not available to you. So you're speculating on the basis that there are active strategies and there are some passive approaches that would help you move the value from what you estimated to what you believe it will be in the future. This would be intelligent speculation. You've defined the proportion of your capital that you're speculating on, and you have a reason. And as part of your reason is based on grounded research, analysis. It's based on data. It's not based on opinions. It's not based on gut feel. It's something that you can quantify. You can explain. On a piece of paper, you can put a statement to say why you're paying an extra 9.8% as a premium. I would call that intelligent investing. So there is intelligent speculation. I would call that intelligent speculation for this proportion of your wealth. The remaining I would call intelligent investing. As you can see, the main issue therefore arises when, not that people speculate. The main issue arises not that people speculate, or not because people speculate, but the main issue arises when speculation is treated as similar to investing. When people confuse both concepts, when people speculate, but who do not have the skill set or the market know-how to do so. Or, one of the things I haven't stated is, imagine if you'd used 91.2% debt and you'd used 9.8% equity. If you were buying something and it was purely based on a gut feel of where the market was moving to, with no substantive analysis or verifiable data, then that would be speculation. That would be you using excessive debt and combining that with guessing and buying an opportunity that is speculative in nature. So keep that in mind. That is something that I thought would be useful to begin this second part of the whole series, which is where we focus purely on the quantitative aspects of valuation. Now, what this means in principle is that if you are an investor, your task is to calculate what the property is worth based on its earning potential and based on the cash flow the property will produce. That's the first step. And if the property, for some reason, happens to be selling at a price that is less than its calculated value, the investor goes ahead and buys the property. A speculator, on the other hand, or a trader, And sometimes inexperienced buyers do the opposite, or they do something different. They buy a property or they make a purchase purely on the expectation that someone else will pay more in the future, irrespective of the price that they paid. And this is where it starts to get slightly worrying. Speculation leans too heavily on hope. I guess this is where the difference really comes in. Speculation relies on hope. You're hoping that someone will come through in the future and they'll pay more than what you paid for the property. And because it relies on hope, in economics and finance, there is a concept called the greater fool theory. The greater fool theory simply says someone else who is a greater fool than I am will come around and will pay more than I paid. So keep that in mind. Whether you're speculating, because there are people who make money from speculation. There are people who are good at speculating, people who buy and sell, and therefore they have a good grasp of the market mood and the market momentum. They're able to identify changes in advance of the change taking place, and they arbitrage that opportunity. And there are people also who make money from the process of investing. Similarly, there are people who lose money because they invest unintelligently, and there are people who lose money by bad speculation. The point I'm trying to make is that no approach will work all the time. Speculation sometimes done properly will work. Investing done properly should work all the time. I believe, however, that I cannot teach you anything about speculation. It's not something I understand. It's not something that is within my circle of competence. And it's not something I enjoy. If you follow an investment approach, and if your approach is grounded, and if it's based on a prudent philosophy, the odds of success over the long term tend to be very high compared to people who speculate, especially those who do so unintelligently. So keep that in mind. Now, in the last few minutes that I have, let me say that we're going to be picking up from the concept of investing. And we'll be going into investing in more detail in the next session. And